Hello YouTube, I'm back again. If you didn't know, I'm Joey, the person in control of this little channel. And today I'm going to review 13 Reasons Why, a very controversial show about suicide. So I decided to look into it after hearing the arguments. Oh, it's such a great show because it talks about suicide. But I didn't really get too much out of those people, so I watched the show for myself. So let's get into it. Her story is about Hannah Baker, a teenage girl who moves to a new town and goes to school at Liberty High School as a sophomore. Through a series of unfortunate events, her reputation is shattered through rumors and humiliation, and at the end of it, she ends up killing herself. And the story is told through flashbacks and little cassette tapes played through a Walkman. Our main character, I always forget his first name. We'll just call him Jensen because that's his last name. He knew Hannah, and he practically loved her, but he was afraid to admit it, and he ended up getting pushed away by her. So our story takes place 3 days after the suicide occurred. He is struggling to come to grips with what has happened. And then when he returns home, he finds a box of cassettes at his doorstep. He plays them and he finds out what they're about. There are these 7 cassette tapes, 2 sides, that talk about the 13 reasons why Hannah killed herself. Each of the 13 reasons is a person, and she intended for the box to be passed from person to person so that the 13 people hear how they contributed to her death. Now, right off the bat, this kind of seems like she's complaining. Like, you see what you did? I mean, obviously, I see what the show is trying to do here, but already we're not really in the best standing with Hannah. She actually develops quite an attitude, and I don't really like that. Anyway, I'm off topic. So Jensen and his friend Tony and the other people all listen to their cassette tapes, and they begin to understand the story. Things like Hannah got into poetry, and this person she met and had become friends with loved her work, but he wanted to show it off. Hannah didn't want to expose her work, but I forget his name too. Anyway, he went on anyway and published it in his magazine at the school. And of course she's very upset and distraught, and, teenage girl things. And her reputation is destroyed through numerous rumors about her and this guy, her and that guy, and, that kind of thing. And this really begins to have an effect on her. And then the icing on the cake is the Jensen thing, where they begin to kind of develop a relationship, and it goes south. And towards the end of it, apparently one of the jocks at the school, Bryce, technically forces himself upon her, and it's a very traumatic event for her. And then afterwards, her parents do an inquiry after her death, and then everyone has to do a deposition. And eventually, the 13th person, who is the counselor that Hannah talked to, is the final receiver of the tapes, besides her parents, who finally got the tapes after all this crap happened. You would have thought they would have been the first people to get the tapes. Anyway, and Jensen leaves it in the counselor's hands what to do with it, because he made a 14th tape with Bryce's confession to what he did. And he wants to get Bryce arrested for what he's done. But then we're just left on a cliffhanger. What does the counselor do? And we also don't know what is the end results of the deposition. All we are left with, excuse me. Wow, I am sick. All we are left with is just our main character's friend, Tony, and some other people riding off to the sunset in their Mustang. It's a cool ending shot, but what happens now? Too much is left thrown up in the air. This is why I hate ambiguous endings. Now we'll begin slicing and dicing. Normally this is the best part for me, but for this, I'm expecting a lot of flack. So, first problem with the show is each episode is very long, 50 to an hour. 50 minutes to an hour, to be exact. In episode 1, it takes 25 minutes to get into reason 1. And even then, they're still being pretty vague. I ain't got time for that. I got stuff to do. It takes too long for the story to get rolling. And a lot of our characters are idiots. I mean, they're written to make mistakes, but how am I supposed to root for any of these characters? Like, Jensen, once everybody realizes the mistakes they've done, it's like, well, I didn't really like some of these characters anyway. You know what I mean? Anyway, one of the first dumb thing to happen is, okay, when Jensen gets the tapes, his dad lets him borrow the boombox because he says he only just has a project to do. He breaks the boombox because his mom startles him. So he goes to his friend Tony's to borrow his Walkman because Tony likes old school stuff. Well, problem number 1, he steals the Walkman right from Tony, right in front of him, and then lies about hearing anything about a Hannah suicide note. He lies right in front of him. And already we're kind of beginning to despise the character a little bit because it's his best friend and he kind of deserves to know. And then he's got the headphones in and he's like this on the bike. He's like, talking to the tape. And there's like a car coming this way with the lights on. There's another one right here. And the only way he could not have seen him was if he was like this. And considering the stupidity of some of these characters, I wouldn't be surprised. What do you know? He gets hit by the car, and the car keeps on going. I don't blame him. I don't want anything to do with Jensen either. But he flies, hits his head, and then there's like all these scratches and stuff. And pay close attention to those wounds for a moment. Okay, so then he goes home. His mom freaks out because he's all beaten up. Says, don't worry about it. So he kind of continues on his quest. Okay. Our next problem is those head wounds. Number 1, when he first gets them, they don't bleed profusely. The thing about head wounds is there's a lot of vessels up here. Even minor cuts bleed a lot. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, and they hardly bleed on his. It's just kind of smudges. And then the wounds disappear incredibly fast, and sometimes they move. Like he has one big one here and then some smaller ones there after the wreck. Well, not wreck, when he gets hit by the car. The next time I see him, I did skip around a little bit, but there's like a ridiculous amount of time going through, judging by these wounds. Most of the wound is already completely gone, just kind of a thin looking thing right there. No scars, no nothing. And then the next time I see him, all those wounds are gone. He just ends up with some new ones, given to him by Bryce. It's like, where are these wounds going? Is there mistakes? It's confusing. Oh yeah. Another point to make is I was very confused for episode 1. I just didn't know what was going on because while the show takes a very long time to develop in some areas, sometimes it's going way too fast in others. Like, wait a minute, did they like each other? Wait, what? It's like, I don't know what's going on. Inform me, episode 1. That's what you're supposed to do. And then probably the worst part of it for me was in the final episode when Hannah goes to talk with the counselor. That was the most bullcrap scene I've ever seen. So she goes in to talk about problems like Bryce and all that, but she doesn't talk. She goes there to talk, but she doesn't talk. She's like, oh, I wish it would all end. And then the counselor's like, well, what? And then she's like, oh, he did this to me. And she gets frustrated with him not knowing what she's talking about. You're not giving anything for him to work with. You're just like, ugh, this sucks. I wish it would all end. He did these things to me. He can't do anything unless you give him a name. And what do you know? She finds out and she's like, oh, are you kidding me? No, this is your fault. And then she goes and then she kills herself. And then we got Bryce's confession, and then nothing really happens to Bryce. They kind of find out, some people listen to the tapes and they find out the truth about Bryce, so they kind of ditch him. They just leave him behind. But nothing happens to him. We're just shown what Bryce really did, and then he's just out the window, along with the real ending. Instead, the ending didn't even feel like an ending. It felt unfinished. Like, tune in next week for the conclusion. I can't tell, this show is very frustrating. What would I rate this show? A 4 out of 10. It's not crap, but it's not a masterpiece like everybody's been saying it is. I understand what they're trying to do here. It's a show about suicide and what it can do to families and friends. But people give this show too much credit. And that concludes this review.